Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be giving my final review of this functional Glamdring sword from Swordier. In case you guys are wondering, this is not a sponsored video. My second sword from Swordier, I bought a historical representation of a sword, as far as I know, not based off of any piece from a museum or anything like that. Had a lot of fun with it. The price was pretty good. And then I saw that they were making a functional Glamdring sword, and I really like the overall aesthetic and shape of Glamdring. So I thought, hey, the last sword was good. Why not get another one? And I love Lord of the Rings. So if you guys have seen Lord of the Rings or seen The Hobbit, then you'll be fairly familiar with this blade. We're going to go over the scabbard. Then we'll talk about the hilt, the blade, cutting performance, and then whether or not you should buy this sword. First, taking a look at the scabbard, it is wood cord. And then there's some sort of, I'm guessing it's a fake leather. It does not seem particularly thick, but it feels nice. It doesn't move around too much. These fittings here, I imagine, are stainless steel. Have not confirmed. It came with an extra sword belt that I just have loosely tied around here to just keep it out of the way. The stitching here on the side is not perfectly straight, but for the price range, it's not bad. And the fact that you're getting something under $300, which to be clear, the whole sword with the scabbard and this added belt thing is under 300 bucks, which is pretty good because there are plenty of companies out there that will charge you way more for the sword and then you don't get any good way to store it at all. It's pretty basic, no detailing or anything like that on the scabbard. I'm totally fine with that. Moving on to the hilt. This is peened. Hopefully you guys will be able to get a good look at that. This peen does look like it has a crack in it or something like that. And it does look like there's potentially some epoxy or some other stuff on here as well. Definitely not the cleanest peen. I'm going to see if I can zoom in on that for you guys, so you guys can get a closer look at that. And then I'll also share some close-ups of the hilt as well, so you guys can take a look at that. I'm guessing that the pommel is cast, and that is simply because on these parts here, it has a little bit of a sandy or grainy texture to it. It's not polished very much here. And I see that a lot with casting. That's why I'm assuming that this is cast. These are probably stainless steel. Moving on to the grip. When I first got this, I was a little concerned about the texture of it, because it did not look particularly comfortable with this cord wrapping around. After handling it, it actually feels totally fine. It can twist in your hand a little bit. This here is not leather. It is definitely like some type of rubber plastic. So this actually does get a little bit slippery when wet. The cord wrap around it is not uncomfortable and actually gives you a little bit more grip. So I was a little worried about that, but it actually turns out it's fine. This is one of those things we'll come back to. Taking a look at the guard, there's runes on both sides of the guard, and there is a gem on both sides. There are other representations that do not come with this gem. I have no idea how the gem is held in. I'm guessing it is just some type of glue, so it may fall off. But if it does end up falling off, then it'll just end up being like many of the other recreations that don't have that. There's no sharp edges or corners on any part of the hilt construction that I am aware of. You can quite comfortably rub everything on here, and you're totally fine. Funny enough, though, while doing some of the cutting, there were a few times where my hand would bang into the guard here. And after one of the cutting sessions, I developed a little bit of bruise on my hand. Couldn't tell you why that is. I've never actually had that happen with a sword before. Could have just been my cutting with that day. We're looking at about 47.5 inches on this particular recreation. The blade itself is about 34.5 inches. And the hilt from the pommel to the guard looks like it is about 13 or so inches if you're going to the very tip of the guard here. Looking at the weight, I have a scale here. The total weight of this sword is 3 pounds 9 ounces, which is really surprising to me because this feels much more maneuverable than the Orcris sword that I reviewed just last week. And this sword is heavier. Moving on to the blade, we have a fuller that runs almost the entire length of the blade. We have this ricasso here. The base starts decently wide. You can see that it slims down here towards the middle and then widens down again. And that gives us that leaf-shaped blade that, again, is not very common for long swords. In fact, historically, I don't know if there actually is any example of a leaf-shaped blade in a longsword, but we do see it anciently on tons of Bronze Age weapons and some later short swords. But for longswords, it's a pretty unique shape, and it kind of gives you that feeling that it's ancient. It helps you recall to that ancient time, but also feels sort of mystical. So, a really good representation of a fantasy blade. One minor gripe I have is that the leaf here towards the top does not seem 100% symmetrical, which again, this is sort of a complex shape when dealing with a large steel blade. And in the price point, I can't complain too much, but I do wish it was a little bit more symmetrical. And I think that impacted the cutting performance a little bit. Moving on to cutting performance, I did all sorts of cuts with this, one-handed cuts. Next test, I'm gonna see how many single-handed cuts I can get. Ooh. Well, sadly, only 2, but the 2 cuts were pretty good. So even though this is longer, probably overall bigger than the Orcris blade, I'd say it's actually probably a little bit easier to maneuver. Well, that last one I just didn't hit with enough force. But single-handed reverse edge, not bad. I did basically draw cuts, which in European swordsmanship terms, a draw cut is different than what they do in Japanese swordsmanship, where in Japanese swordsmanship, a draw cut is where you draw the sword and cut with it in one motion. In European swordsmanship, it typically refers to drawing the sword. So I did, I guess, what you would call no distance cuts, where you have the sword right next to the water bottle and you just try to draw the sword through. And actually, it was on the draws that it felt like the guard was banging my hand up. Interestingly enough, I think the leaf, the swell towards the blade, made those cuts a little bit more difficult, which was a surprise to me because I thought it would make it easier, but that did not seem to be the case. Other than that, I performed well. You'll see on one part, I do a combination cut and I actually aim a little low and I hit the stand and it chopped off a bit of the wood there. And there was no damage to the sword at all. I'm going to try doing a couple of cut combinations where I will throw a few consecutive cuts and see how easy it is to control, redirect, things like that. Ooh. Okay, so here's where I scalped the stand. I realized I was coming in a little too low and I tried to pull up, but was not enough. Here's the sword. No discernible edge damage, so that's good. It held up great there. It works great. It came sharp. In this first test, I'm going to take a piece of magazine paper. I'm going to put it on the tip, lift it up, and then try to chop the paper. You can see there is a little bit of tearing, but cut most of it. Next, we're going to be doing some double cuts with Glamdring, Gandalf sword. We're going to be trying to cut the bottom bottle and then the top bottle. We wanted to see how the edge held up after a week or so cutting. So it cuts pretty well. Overall, it feels kind of what you would expect a longsword to feel like. It doesn't feel overly top heavy, a lot more maneuverable than I initially thought. What actually really surprised me is how well this thrusts. It was very easy to control the point and it penetrated very easily. It's really fun to use. How faithful is this recreation? The overall shape and look, yes, it does look very much like a Glamdring. And even in some of my videos, people mention that they immediately recognized the sword, that it was a Glamdring sword. It looks like the pommel of Glamdring, the metal part is a little bit longer. The leather grip portion seems to be a little bit smaller. And in the movie, Glamdring has blue leather. I'm not sure why they decided to go with black on here. I'm not sure if that's just what this material comes in and it's harder to get a blue version. One thought I had when I was looking at this is, why don't they just do a normal cord wrap? And then I looked and saw that the original Glamdring from the movie does have something very similar, where it's not just cord wrap, where you take leather and then you get it wet to soften it a little bit, and then you wrap cord around it, and then it imprints the pattern of that cord on it. That it's actually like this, where they have some piece of leather or something wrapping around the handle, and then they cover it, and you have this very similar texture. So I was actually surprised because I wasn't paying that much attention, apparently. This is how the Glamdring is. Although, personally, I think whatever cord they use around here could be a little bit thinner, a little bit smaller. But again, it's not uncomfortable. I personally wouldn't mind if they changed this. I think I just prefer the feeling of a normal wrap where you do leather and then wrap it in cord. And I think it would help with this slippery texture on whatever this material is. Moving on to my next portion, is it worth buying this sword? I would say yes. You're getting a functional sword under $300 that is just super fun to use in general. So if you like swords, I would just recommend this in general. On top of that, you get the added bonus that this is a Glamdring replica. So if you happen to love Lord of the Rings and you just want to have a Glamdring, and then as an added bonus, you get to have something that you can actually take out and use and kill water bottle goblins with, and is at least durable enough that if you mess up a few cuts, your sword's not going to break or bend or snap, at least based on my experience. Things that I would like to see improved, I personally would just prefer this grip to be something else, or heck, maybe you could even keep it the same and you just cord wrap it. I don't know how much extra expense that would add to the sword. If we could standardize this blade a little bit better to ensure that it's symmetrical, that would be nice too, if we could just clean that peanut. One final thing, I think this might just be because of how big the cord is that they used under the leather. Down here, it is a little circular. And so I think if they just used a slightly smaller cord, that the handle would be profiled a little bit better. We're talking about a sword that's under $300. Would I recommend this sword? 100%. I would 100% recommend this sword. It is a great time, loads of fun, and I am glad that I purchased it. So hopefully that helps you decide if this is the right sword for you. And this is definitely one of those swords whenever I'm doing cutting with friends or family. This will be one of those swords that will be tons of fun, I think, for people to try and use and cut with, and is in the price point that it's totally fine to let someone who's inexperienced cut with it. And if they somehow break the sword, you didn't just break the bank. But at the same time, it also seems fairly durable and is probably not going to break just from a couple of bad cuts. Seems like the best of all worlds, in my opinion, as the functional Glamdring. And yeah, hope that helps. Have a good one.